Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Jessi Roesch on the podcast. She is the founder and CEO of a company called Downland, where she is trying to support regenerative farming, knowing that there are about 70% of U.S. farms are going to turn over or change hands over the next number of years. So we talk about her journey from kind of being a W-2 into actually launching Downland, some of the kind of pitfalls and some of the challenges that she's experienced, and then we talk about some of the kind of opportunities that are coming up in the next 12 months. Very interesting episode, kind of learning from a startup founder. So let's get Jessi on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Jessi, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on.
Hey, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you jumping on. And so I guess let's kind of just start things off, give the audience a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I am Jessi Roesch, rhymes with fresh. I am the founder and CEO of Downland. We help match the next generation of climate-smart farmers and ranchers with landowners so that they can launch their operation. We're very much in the early days of this operation, and we're building it out of Austin, Texas, where I've been based for the last 5 years or so.
And so give us a little bit more about like what Downland is, right? Like, so, you know, you have, obviously you're matching kind of people that want to get into ranching or farming, and then you've got people that have land. Like maybe give us a little bit of an overview of like who the audience is and how it all works.
Yeah, there's a lot of forces at play in this space, Justin. I'm sure we'll get to double click on a lot of them. Fundamentally, Downland is working to address a workforce problem that we have. The average age of a farmer in the U.S. is 57, 58 years old.
Okay.
We expect that 70% of U.S. farms are going to change hands in the next 20 years, which is a shocking figure. We have this huge amount of land and wealth and pieces of our food supply that are going to change hands, but we don't have those folks well connected with folks who are interested in doing that kind of work, particularly if they don't have someone directly in their family who wants to manage the farm. How do we connect the folks who do want to do that work and the folks who have that land to get started? And there's a lot of moving forces here in terms of growing consumer demand for regenerative agriculture products. Downland is focusing on producers who are skilled in regenerative agriculture, which is a style of agriculture that prioritizes the health of the soil. If you remember the food chain, all the nutrients that come from your food first come from the soil. And so rebuilding the soils and maintaining those have a ton of benefits for nutrient density, longevity of the soil and of the land, drought and flood resistance, and all sorts of other climate benefits. At the same time, there's this growing generation of folks who want to do this type of work, who maybe have gone through an apprenticeship program, a volunteer program, some type of nonprofit place, but there's a gap in getting them access to land to start that operation if it's not already in their family. So we're helping bridge those connections between the younger generation who wants to do this work and the generation of landholders who are trying to figure out what's next.
Before we dig into kind of the business of Downland and kind of where you are in your journey, like regenerative farming versus traditional farming, like what's the difference? What are the benefits? Maybe just kind of start there, and then we'll kind of go into the business side.
Yeah, and that's a question that a lot of folks will give you a lot of different answers for. When I talk about regenerative, I'm talking about prioritizing the health of the soil as the bedrock of the foundation of your agriculture operation. that can mean a lot of different things depending on what you're raising and where you're raising it. Whether you're ranching, you might be doing rotational grazing. If you're row cropping, you might be reducing or removing tillage or growing a cover crop. But in general, it's using the things that nature has given us already to improve the health of the soil. There's a lot of roots in regenerative practices and indigenous practices as well. So you'll hear a lot of folks sort of attribute some of these practices and principles to indigenous practices as well. But they get applied in a lot of different ways, and context is one of the most important pieces to take in when you're deciding what actually does regenerative mean in this plot of land I'm on right in front of me.
Oh, got it. So it could mean something different if you're a crop grower versus cattle or any kind of other like grazing animal. It could be a different definition, if you will.
It could be a different set of practices, but in principle, it's how do we use the signals that nature is giving us and build great soil.
Got it. Well, that's a good definition, or an easier thing to I guess, understand and apply. From a business perspective, like when did you start it? How did you get this idea? And then we'll kind of get to the where you are now kind of phase.
Yeah. My interest in health and wellness and where my food comes from goes back more than 15 years. The summer I turned 16, I got my first car and I was mobile that summer. And when you get mobile, you're responsible for things, taking your siblings to sports practice, running errands, getting stuff at the grocery store. And that summer that I got my first car, my grandparents weren't doing so well, and I was pretty involved in taking care of them as they were aging, and seeing them not doing so well really ingrained in me the sense of like, man, how do I have a great end of life experience that doesn't look like this? And you don't pull the thread of how do you live a long and healthy life forever. Food is a pretty important input to that. And when you start pulling into where our food comes from and how it gets on our plate, you find a lot of problems pretty quickly. And so fast forward through a whole bunch of side hobbies and pursuits as throughout my 20s, from selling essential oils to starting doing CrossFit and all kinds of different sports and fitness routines, 30-day yoga challenges, so on and so forth, have really built this lifestyle around understanding where does my food come from, how do I integrate it into my life as fuel for all the other things I want to accomplish. And as part of that journey, I got to meet friends of ours who are just outside of Austin had started a regenerative ranch, more of a homestead type operation.
Okay.
But once they had moved and kind of settled in, we went and had dinner, and I just was blown away when I saw what they were doing. I heard about this integration of the soil and the connection of soil health to human health in a way that had never dawned on me before. And so fast forward, that has been almost 4 years ago. And I've been reading all the articles, watching all the documentaries, going to all the meetups, and meeting a lot of incredible people to build this team and build this business since then.
Got it. And so from a business perspective, like how does the business work? Like where do you make money? Where does it benefit these 70% of U.S. farms are going to change hands in the next number of years? Like how does Downland kind of act, or what is the business that kind of helps kind of move all that kind of responsibility from the farmer that may not have a sibling or a child that's going to take over that farm?
Yeah. Downland makes our money by taking a revenue share off the farm operations that we launch. You can kind of think of us like an accelerator for new regenerative operations, or like a farm franchise in a box kind of thing. And so that was really important because we wanted to grow alongside our farms. We wanted to have a shared incentive that if they do well, we do well, and not just we have a transaction and like run away.
Yep.
Having that ongoing relationship with the farms and ensuring that they are successful and plugged in to a lot of other parts of the supply chain was something that's really core to us. We're still in the process of being able to launch that first match and our fundraising to do so. But we are in the process of getting ready to do that and have a wait list of ranching residents, a wait list of landowners, and hopefully a wait list of investors very soon to get started.
So your journey right now is you have interest from the farmer side. I want to learn how to be a regenerative farmer. And you've got interest from people that have the land that are like, hey, I'm willing to give or work with part or all of my farm. And now you just need some of the connective tissue, i.e. some capital and some energy to kind of move the needle forward to launch that first farm. And what does that mean to launch the farm? Like, is it just, it seems like it's more than just saying, hey, I've got 100 acres of land that I'm willing to have somebody else farm. Right? Because I grew up on a very small farm in central PA. We weren't farmers, but we knew the farmers around us. And so we just let them use our land to farm crops and, corn and soybeans and all that fun stuff. So it seems like it's a little bit more involved than just saying being a matchmaker.
And I think there's a version of the business that can be that matchmaker service as we evolve. Ultimately, it's really important to me that we have that shared growth incentive, especially in these days when regenerative agriculture is so new. It's very much an early trend, and I believe that regenerative will be the new organic. The regenerative market is sized today what the organic market was sized in around 2000. Fast forward 25 years, it's a $60 billion market, and you cannot go into a grocery store without seeing some type of organic products labeled on the shelves. And so we're very early in those days of what that looks like with regenerative and how that adoption and change in consumer demand is going to take place. I think there's also opportunities for us to build around some of those more transactional pieces, but it's not the heart of what we want to be. And I think as we start to find investors to come alongside us, the ones that are going to be a fit are going to be ones that align with that mission.
Yeah, and I guess the benefit to the farmer is they don't have to do the work, right? Or are you also educating these farmers on how to change practice, but also still provide for their families?
Yeah, we are fundamentally focused on new farmers launching new operations. There is a great ecosystem within the regenerative space, folks like Fractal Ag and Mad Capital who are well suited to existing farmers who might want to have loans to convert their operation or expand their regenerative operation. Folks like Dirt Capital Partners also help with some of those types of services. But there is this gap for new farmers who might want to start with something smaller scale. Ultimately, Downland is helping bring together the ecosystem around that. We are very focused on land access as our primary point of focus, but have built a really great network of folks around us like Regen Poultry, Understanding Ag, and folks who are very skilled in actually what do I do if I'm starting an operation and how do I deploy those practices in a new setting with a new operator. And so we're starting to incubate that new workforce at this very beginning while surrounding them with ecosystem services that can help them be successful, including training, including access to financing, and including go-to-market strategies when the time is right for all of those things.
And where are you finding the newbie farmers, right? Who are they? What's the kind of demographic or kind of typical profile of a person, if there is one, that is interested to be like, hey, I want to, and maybe a follow-on to that is like, if I would raise my hand and say, hey, I want to be part of this mission and this next kind of phase in this regenerative farming, and I get matched with a farmer in Iowa, do I have to move to Iowa? Like, how does that, I live in Austin, so like, how does that work? So maybe start with the first part of who, and then kind of the logistics.
Yeah, the persona of someone who wants to become one of our farming and ranching residents falls into a few categories. And honestly, there's still a lot of debate in the agriculture space of like what is regenerative, earning some credibility on what regenerative is, a little bit of tension between the idea of disrupting conventional norms and some of what has been done. So it's really important as folks look at these practices and consider converting to them to one, be experimental about it. That's kind of the advice for existing farmers who might be looking at this, but also have respect and reverence for introducing change in a way that is curious and comes alongside the practitioner. So all that to say, there are folks who come out of universities with the appropriate kind of degrees and pedigree to do this type of work.
Okay.
That said, those folks tend to have been trained on a lot of conventional methodologies, and depending on what level of regenerative production you're going to be entering into, what types of certifications you might pursue, those conventional practices can actually be quite problematic and degrade your attempt to be regenerative along the way. And so if your aim is to rebuild the soil, your aim may be different than what you've been taught in university. That said, there are folks who go through university programs who would be interested in this type of work. Texas, which is it? What's the one in San Marcos? I always
Texas State? Is that Texas
Yes,
State?
thank you. Yeah, I was just like doing a visit with setting up a visit with someone to Texas Tech and was like, no, is that the one? No.
That's not the right one.
Yeah. Texas State has a program that's focused on sustainable and regenerative agriculture and is one of the emerging programs in the country. Ag recruiters also help with this type of work, and you can also source these types of folks as a funnel from nonprofit programs and apprenticeships. The USDA had a Climate Smart grant that they offered earlier this year that helped fund apprenticeships for folks to do this type of work. They had funded about 500 spots, and according to their press release, had about 50,000 people interested. So they were highly oversubscribed in terms of a workforce trying to get into doing this type of work and folks trying to develop these types of skills.
Interesting. Yeah, that's because you hear about the workforce problem is that's a big issue. Coming from the recruiting side, like talent is typically in these kind of manual labor, skilled trade types work. It's a talent issue and almost a workforce kind of management issue as well. But that's interesting that they were massively oversubscribed for a couple hundred spots. That's very fascinating.
Yeah, I'll answer the other half of your question too, because I think it's something that we don't have an answer for, but I'm very curious to experiment with. Fundamentally, farming, the way it's done today, tends to be a very lonely job. It also tends to be one that can overwhelm individuals with debt, particularly if you're aligned to some of the big producer machinery and structure that's out there. You can really get saddled up with a lot of debt and a lot of financial risk and capital risk very quickly. And I think there's ways that when I was doing customer research for Downland, I talked to about 50 farmers and ranchers over the course of a 2-week period. I had really supercharged my efforts in a kind of a sprint to try and talk to a lot of folks. And other than access to land and access to capital, the third thing that came up the most frequently as a reason for people to convert to regenerative or a barrier to converting to regenerative practices was this idea of community. And these themes of education, training, some of that like lone wolf sort of mentality are some of the things that came out in that community theme. Okay. And I think there's ways to be really thoughtful about making sure the type of job we create and the next generation of farmers don't struggle with these kinds of challenges in the same way. And I think there's a lot of signals we can take from other types of jobs to perhaps combat that. Perhaps that's equity ownership that we see in the startup space. Perhaps that is job rotation. Perhaps that's just different practices and ways that we work with the communities we operate in, job rotation, things of that nature. As someone who works in this kind of recruiting space, you probably have a lot of ideas of how that could look. And I think it's an opportunity for us to turn some of that, the way it's been done, on its head a little bit and have better mental health outcomes and success outcomes for farmers at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be kind of this balance of production, because obviously this is a money-making endeavor, right? As opposed in the balance of that versus homesteading, right, where you're just growing food for yourself and maybe your family and all that stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that can go on or things that can be kind of turned up or turned down when it comes to kind of these talent challenges, but happy to talk offline about thoughts and ideas and all that fun stuff, obviously. As far as like the business goes, and it sounds like you're kind of in this raising money to help to kind of launch that first initial farm and all of that. Where are you in that journey? What's the and then I guess have you identified maybe a farmer and a piece of land yet, or where are we in that kind of, hey, we may launch our first one in the next 1, 3, 6, 12 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our financial model is built off financial models from universities who do work in this type of space. The University of Minnesota has some really robust financial models that we've been leaning on. Our sweet spot is anywhere from 100 to 1,000 acres, and of the 17 LOIs we have signed so far, about 5 of those are kind of in Central Texas, where I'm based. We also have a small Midwest contingency where I'm from and where we have a couple advisors based out of. So those are the 2 regions that we're really looking at. In terms of what it takes to get us there, I think this has been a key learning of mine, is understanding the profile of your investor to be able to start your operation and get it off to... It's been really helpful to have time to be thoughtful about bringing the right investor to the table for this type of work. Yeah. And my background is in venture capital. And as I've gone through the fundraising experience as a first-time fundraiser, though I bring a lot of operational experience to the table and have built a really great network of regenerative practitioners around me, I've been learning how to fundraise. And the cynic in me is quite disappointed when I hear about funds that want to make money and want to support founders, but in the fine print of that, they really do have a thesis, and ultimately that's an obligation to their LPs that this is the way we're going to do those things. And so qualifying investors has been a really core way to make sure that I'm not wasting my time or theirs and having conversations that are not going to go anywhere. Ultimately, we're building a product and a process that is going to be hardware, in air quotes, intensive in terms of what we're building and what we need. And so folks who are building B2B SaaS aren't going to be down for that. Folks who are looking for a 3 to 5 year exit are not going to be down for that. But people who are invested in the long term, perhaps real estate investors is my latest profile of investor that I'm getting to know, or specialty real estate investors, folks who've done tech-enabled services, marketplace investors. Those types of folks are going to understand the types of time horizons and goals that we have and make sure that they're not pulling us in a direction we don't want to be pulled in.
No, that makes sense. And I guess, talking about the fundraising thing and some lessons learned, I guess, for somebody listening to this that, maybe is working a W-2 job and they started a side hustle, whether it's, in a similar genre that you're in, or maybe it is a SaaS business or an e-commerce business or something else, like because obviously you worked a W-2, up until you kind of started this and all of that, I guess, what are some lessons learned maybe that if you could go back you would do differently and maybe that would have accelerated your path, or what would you tell that person sitting in a W-2 that's got this idea and this pull, because your kind of starting point was 15 years ago, right? And you had no idea at that point that Downland was kind of the baby that you were going to birth that would kind of scratch the itch of trying to find the right food and everything. But, so somebody may be sitting there like, I've got all these ideas, but I just don't have the time, money, et cetera, to push in, or maybe the risk profile to jump into an entrepreneurial venture with a lot of unknowns, right?
Yeah.
So I threw a couple questions out there, but you can kind of take them if you take which ones you want.
Yeah. Thematically, Justin, I think it's like, when do you take the leap and when do you start? And I think the answer I like to think of is like, what is the thing you cannot stop thinking about? Along this journey of starting this work at which I've been doing with some level of seriousness over really the last like 3 to 4 years. I've had 3 or 4 different jobs at given points in time to be able to give myself opportunities to work in and around this industry, whether that's kind of side gigs or consulting contract gigs that are kind of industry adjacent.
Okay.
And those things have been really useful. One, to just like work in an industry, see if I like it, see if I like the people, see if the vibe fits, and also make money and pay the bills doing that, and also use my work hours as learning time.
Yeah.
So the extent to which your current W-2 enables you to keep learning about the industry you're in, like stay as long as possible, until you have revenue that can replace your salary, or you are fortunate to have a very rich uncle or spouse that can, make sure those things are covered for you. Until those things are in place, it's probably best to stay where you're at and until you can have that stability in place. That said, I'm someone who I pride myself on doing hard things, and starting a business is the hardest thing I've done. Yeah. I am a CrossFit level 2 trainer. I'm 5th in the state in Olympic weightlifting. I once prevented someone in the New York City subway from pickpocketing me at knife point by giving them a stern look in the eye and telling them no. Like, can I cuss?
Sure.
Like, I'm a badass, and this is the hardest thing I've done. And so I think expecting that, but being so committed to the work that you're doing, will help you overcome the late nights, the hard hours, and the extra time it does take when you're making sacrifices, maybe in your personal spending, in your personal schedule, in the relationships that you might not be spending as much time with as you're building something that you love.
Yeah, there's definite sacrifices, whether it's you're single and you've got to sacrifice kind of your own personal spending or your friendships, but if you're also in you got a spouse or a family, it's time and all of that stuff. Starting my recruiting business was, I started it right when COVID started, so that was not a perfect time to start. So timing is also important. Yes. Because if I would have started in a different time period, it may have been different. But but no, I think you're right. Like, starting a business is probably one of the hardest things that somebody's going to go through. Although being 5th in the state in Olympic weightlifting is probably not super easy either. I would expect. So that's pretty impressive. I guess as we kind of wind this down a little bit here, what does the next 12 months look like for you? Like if we could record this podcast 1 year from today, where would you like to say you've gotten to in those last 12 months?
That's a great question. I'm fortunate that client services work that we've been doing through Downland has been supporting our burn and supporting my livelihood and making it really easy to turn down bad terms and rebuild. At this stage of the company, I'm not selling 40%.
Yeah.
I'm not giving away board seats. We're not doing any of that. It's much too soon for it. And this client work that we've been doing has really helped us be firm in that and negotiate from a place of power. That said, I'm excited in the next 12 months to hopefully bring in some of our fundraising dollars and get started on a few strategic initiatives, including a food as medicine trial with some of our design partners, establishing our nonprofit arm, which will open up more blended financing options through things like donations and grants, and tends to be a very common strategy within the regenerative space. Folks like Renature and Mad Capital have used a similar strategy to enable both nonprofit and for-profit work in what they're doing. And we're excited to launch our first farm and take some food to market in a circular way and in a way that has much less food miles in between.
Got it. Well, that sounds like you got a lot on your plate for the next 12 months. So I wish you the best of luck. But before we get out of here, I've got a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest. So first question is, what is your favorite business-related book?
Ooh, what is my favorite? StrengthsFinder is one of the things I fundamentally I fundamentally intellectualize. I'm not using any of those words correctly. StrengthsFinder is a short, easy read that I have internalized as part of my personal leadership strategy and bring a lot of those principles to how I think about building Downland. In thinking about how farming can be done differently, how do we put people who are great at something in roles where they can do more of what they're great at every day? So that is a huge fundamental piece of my leadership style.
No, I like that. I definitely checked out StrengthsFinder. It's worth a read. All right, question 2.
And you mostly don't have to read it. You take a quiz and just read about yourself. Like it's kind of
it definitely is something that gives you kind of like perspective, like, oh wow, okay, this is an area for me to kind of focus on. So
it kind of strokes your ego because it's like, you're great at this. Like, be excited about being great at the things you're great at and be less nervous or worried about the things you're not great at.
Yeah, there's another book called Who Not How. It's all about how you can, if you don't like doing something, then you find somebody that's your who that loves doing that, and you hire them and you work with them, and then you do what you're great at, and that person does what they're great at, and it's a match made in heaven kind of a thing. So, all right, question 2, and you probably, this may be something you've already talked about, but what's your favorite thing to do outside of work?
I'm rarely not working. I do love working, but when I'm not working, I'm usually at the gym. I love coaching people to that kind of StrengthsFinder perspective. I love helping people find the things that they're good at and maybe surprise themselves in the things that they can be good at or the things they can become good at. So I get to do that. I do a little bit of group class coaching locally here and there, and love spending time at the gym and seeing people thrive in that way.
Yeah, I figured you have to be at the gym at some point to be the 5th in the state in Olympic weightlifting. So that's not something you just come from sitting on the couch.
Yes, unfortunately, I have a shoulder injury holding me down. So we'll see if I can reclaim my spot next year. I got about 4 more months to get there.
We'll add that to the next your to the 12-month list of things to do. All right, last question here. This is a fun one. What's your favorite vacation spot?
Oh, I don't take vacation.
Come on, no vacation?
Oh gosh, I couldn't even tell you the last time I went on a vacation. I mean, I love a road trip. Like, I actually really love driving. That's another reason this kind of work is well suited to me. I love to go on a country drive. I love to listen to music with the windows down and feel like I'm in an indie film. That's
your vacation.
Yes.
Fair enough.
And you can do that on a Wednesday afternoon driving home.
And that costs $0. You can just go drive, other than the gas.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Well, if people want to reach out to you, Jessi, and learn more about Downland, learn more about what you're doing, maybe you want to be a farmer or kind of work from the land side of it, how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way to follow you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, folks can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Roesch, Roesch. Rhymes with fresh is the slug, so you can find me that way. You can also follow along. We're also raising through a crowdfund right now, so folks can check that out at wefunder.com/downland. That's been a really exciting way for folks to get involved at any investment level. Accredited investor status not required, and anyone can jump in for as little as $100. As someone who grew up with my mom working at the gas station and my dad working at the bowling alley, when people told me just raise friends and family money to start your business, like, that felt super tone deaf to me. But I'm grateful for the folks at WeFunder and other folks who have jumped into our crowdfund and help us get started. So in addition to institutional funds, that's an easy way for folks to jump in and get involved.
Yeah, no, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes so people can check that out. Well, Jessi, it was awesome to catch up and chat more about Downland and what's going on. It sounds like you've got a very exciting next 12 months ahead of you. So it was great to have you. I appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Justin. Glad to be here.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.